us this morning. A lot to get to. I want to start first, Senator. The 3 soldiers killed over the weekend at the base in Jordan, and Iran has its fingerprints all over this. What needs to be the response of the United States, in your opinion?
Well, we're going to have to hit back, and we're going to have to hit back hard. And we're going to have to knock some people into a new zip code. We've had over 150 attacks by Iran or its proxies against American soldiers since the war with Hamas started. President Biden has allowed it to go on far too long. You're dealing with fanatics. You're not dealing with rational people. And peace through weakness never works. They understand one thing, and that is force. And we have to make Iran understand that if they're going to attack Americans, then we're going to make them pay the price every single time. And I think the reason that we're being tested in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and in Southeast Asia, and the Indo-Pacific is because the Ayatollah, Putin, and President Xi in China are working together, and they perceive America as being in decline and our president as being weak, and they're taking advantage of it. I wish I didn't have to say that, but I think that's what's going on. It started with Afghanistan, but that's not the only reason. You know, we have sanctions right now on Iran. We could choke them to death economically by stopping them from selling their oil, but President Biden won't enforce the sanctions.
Yeah,
I just don't get it.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of Americans are in that same camp and agree with everything that you just said. Is there a balance there, though, that you need to be careful with in terms of not getting us into a fully escalated war with Iran?
Well, sure. You want your response to be appropriate, but the responses so far have been inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And after 450 acts of war against America, we have to respond. And every time we have responded with Iran forcefully, not under this president, but under prior presidents, Iran has backed off.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's just, I wish the world didn't work that way, but that's the way it does. And America has enemies, and we have to make them respect us.
I know it was, a couple months ago, and someone had asked the president about, if Iran, what would be his message to Iran? He just said, don't. So much for that. I mean...
Well, they did. Yeah. They did.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they're going to keep doing it until they understand that they can't push America back against the wall and through it. And I don't know what response President Biden is going to have here, but it's just going to get worse if we don't respond.
Well, and that's kind of the scary thing because, that was going to be my comment. We just keep being perceived by the world as weak now, and they're going to keep taking advantage of that. Do we have time, I guess is my question, to for our political process to work out, to make the change we need to make if this administration isn't doing anything?
Well, it's hard. You can't change somebody who doesn't want to be changed, and President Biden either has the will or he doesn't. We know where these attacks are coming from. They're coming from Iran and all of the terrorist groups that Iran sponsors. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The Houthis, the Hezbollah, Hamas, terrorist groups in Iraq and Syria. And the reason that Iran is able to do this financially is because President Biden has given them the money. He's given them cash, He's not enforcing the sanctions against their oil, so they've got a lot of cash flow from selling their oil. And I guess he thinks that if we're nice to them, they will reciprocate. But these are fanatical people. They hate Jews. They hate Americans. Their religion teaches them, at least their interpretation of their religion teaches them, that they are supposed to kill people in the name of God. And it's hard to reason with crazy people.
And meanwhile, not only do we have those attacks happening, we've also got the crisis going on at the border right now, and essentially being attacked from that area too. And he's not doing anything about it.
Well, that's a part of the national security. In terms of the Middle East, though, our opponents there, many of our opponents are fanatical, but they're still, they understand two things. They understand pain and they understand death. And they're trying to inflict both on us, and we just have to reciprocate. In terms of the border, it is an open bleeding wound. It is wide open. It has been wide open since President Biden, his first day in office, when he rescinded all of the things that we had done to secure the border. President Biden and the loon wing of his party, which is in control, they just believe in open borders. They believe that anyone who wants to ought to be able to come into the United States without any vetting. And they are. Since President Biden has been president, about, as best I can tell, about 8.6 million people have come in. We don't have the slightest idea who they are. That's like adding 4 Nebraskas to America. Mm-hmm. That's a blatant violation of law. No other country does it. The only reason that President Biden is suddenly paying attention right now and trying to spin that he hasn't been doing this is because he's running for re-election. And the border, the open border is one of the main issues. That's where we are. Look, Republicans aren't perfect, but right now the other side, led by President Biden, they're crazy.
That's a good way to put it. Senator John Kennedy, our guest here on Talkback. We need to take a quick break. We'll come back with more with him right after this.
KSY's Talkback on KSYL.
Oh, beauty, go.
All right, we are back here on this Tuesday morning. Senator John Kennedy is our guest, and we were talking about the border situation heading into the break. Right now, kind of the story in Washington is what's going to happen with this bill that the Senate is working on that Speaker Mike Johnson in the House does not seem to be in favor of. What can you tell us about this bill as far as what it will actually do for the border, while apparently it also has a lot of funding for Ukraine?
Well, Al, there's not much I can tell you because I haven't seen the bill. The bill, they've been promising to release it to us for the last month. The bill has been put together by Senator James Lankford, a Republican from Oklahoma, who's a good man, and Senator Chris Murphy, who happens to be a Democrat from Connecticut. I'm sure that Senator Schumer, who leads the Democrats, and Senator McConnell, the minority leader for the Republicans, know what's in the bill. But none of the rest of us know. We really haven't had input. I just have no idea what to expect. I keep reading stories about it's a good bill, it's a bad bill, and I'm sitting there scratching my head going, how do they know?
Right.
I don't know what's in the thing. I don't know when they'll release it. Every week they promise they're going to release it. Same for this week. When they do release it, they need to give us a reasonable amount of time to read it, to allow us to offer amendments. I'm all for anything that will secure the border, but I'm not for new provisions that will give President Biden wiggle room, because the Democrats have fought every step of the way on the border bill. You would think they would join with us and say, let's secure the border, and we know how to do it. But they haven't. And what that tells me is they believe in open borders. Now, they have the right to believe in open borders in America. You can believe what you want. But it would be far more intellectually honest, in my opinion, and fairer to the American people if President Biden and the loon wing of his party that's in control would just step up and say, look, we believe in open borders. We think everybody who wants to should be able to come into America. We think vetting people and asking them questions about who they are is racist. And that's what we believe, because that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And in politics, sometimes, as in life, what you do is what you believe. Everything else is just cottage cheese, man. You got to watch what people do.
For sure. Another issue, not so much with the border, but this happened on Friday. The administration came out and announced that they're going to put a pause on either new or pending permits for liquefied natural gas export terminals in the United States. Some are seeing this as that's Biden taking a little shot at Texas, but it's going to hurt way more than just Texas, including Louisiana. And you actually wrote an op-ed yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about this. So let's just talk about what you wrote and your reaction to that decision last week.
Well, what the president did is bone deep, down to the marrow, stupid. It just is. It undermines America's energy security to try to stop all liquefied natural gas. The LNG it hurts. The president says he's for carbon neutrality. Well, it hurts carbon neutrality because natural gas is much cleaner than coal. Mm-hmm. America is one of the few countries that has actually in the past 10 years seen its carbon emissions reduced, and the reason that happened is because of natural gas relative to coal, as I said, and other sources of fuel. It's very good for the environment. It's going to hurt Europe. It's going to force Europe to be more dependent on Russia. It's going to hurt our friends in Southeast Asia who depend on our natural gas. I cannot see one advantage of doing this except, once again, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but there is a loon wing of the Democratic Party that is clearly in control. And they hate fossil fuels, and they want to end all fossil fuels. And President Biden is pandering to them.
You know, when Biden was a senator, at least maybe 20, 30 years ago, people saw him a little bit maybe more as a centrist. Have you been surprised by kind of the breathtaking level of the leftist bent that this administration has had in these 3.5 years?
Yes, very. I didn't serve in the Senate with President Biden, but I've studied his record, and some of my colleagues did. And he was he was more of a centrist. He ran against Bernie Sanders. He got the Democratic Party nomination because the powers that be in the Democratic Party said we can't have Senator Bernie Sanders because he'll be too radical. I agreed with that, by the way.
Yeah.
But he's been Bernie Sanders Jr. He's at least been Bernie Sanders' first cousin. I mean, he's done everything that Bernie Sanders would have done. And, you can go through crime, the border, inflation, spending, debt, Afghanistan. You can just go down the list. He's mismanaged COVID, mismanaged Congress. And he's governed. He's the most far left president we've had that I can remember, even more so than President Obama.
Not to sound conspiratorial, but do you think, given his mental condition that he's really the one in charge of all this anyway?
We don't know. Sometimes I'm asked, who's the president and what's his policy, and I say, well, the real power is whoever has control of that teleprompter. We just don't know. We have very little contact, and I think this is true of many of my Democratic colleagues in the Senate too, with President Biden. They keep him very isolated and very insulated.
Which is which is not what previous administrations, or what you saw through previous administrations, I would say, right?
No. And generally, presidents set policy more than you would think and advocate for their policy by accessing the American people directly, usually through press conferences. President Biden hasn't done that. I don't know that he's ever had a freewheeling press conference where he just took all questions. That when he does have a press conference, they try to script it. They pick their favorite journalists to ask questions. They screen the questions ahead of time. I don't know how President Biden's going to run a campaign without talking to people, but they're going to try to do it. So far, his approach hasn't worked. You can see the poll numbers. He's about as popular as a sinkhole, it's just his numbers, I think, are the worst I've ever seen for a president. Maybe President Carter's were worse. But the American people, they may be poorer under President Biden, but they're not stupid. They figured this out.
Yeah, for sure.
We sure hope so.
I saw yesterday where the New York Times had a story talking about what kind of strategies the Biden campaign might use for this election, and calling on Taylor Swift to be an influencer.
Right.
How do the Republicans combat Taylor Swift, Senator?
Well, look, I don't know Ms. Swift. I really don't know that much about her politics, but trying to convince the American people that the right policies are those articulated by movie stars and pop singers, I just think demonstrates your weakness. That's the biggest problem with this administration. They just think they condescend American people. They think the American people they think we're deplorables.
Yeah.
We're not very smart, and we ought to just do what the elites in Washington tell us to do and not question it. And we're not capable of living our own lives and educating our own children. And that's their attitude. It's not just the entrenched politicians. It's the media. It's the academics at the universities. It's a lot of these corporate phonies, these CEOs that run corporations. And I don't know who they think built America. It was ordinary people getting up, ordinary Americans getting up every day, going to work, obeying law, paying their taxes, trying to do the right thing by their kids, creating jobs. But now, all of a sudden, the elite that's in charge, they think, oh, man, these people, these deplorables just can't run their own lives, so we're going to have to run their lives for them. And the American people were insulted, and I think they're going to vote accordingly.
Last question, and this kind of plays off what you just said. I remember when President Trump appeared in Lake Charles a few years ago during the governor campaign, you said during that appearance that's why people love Donald Trump, because he doesn't talk down to them. What are your thoughts on where that campaign stands now, especially with what happened in New York Friday with this crazy trial there? What are you expecting out of former President Trump for the rest of this campaign?
Well, I don't know. I think the primaries are over. No disrespect to Governor Haley, but I think President Biden is going to be the the Democratic nominee, and President Trump's going to be the Republican nominee. I think that the Biden folks have, and I regret this, they have politicized our civil and criminal justice system in terms of trying to disqualify their opponent. We don't do that in America. We never have until now. Other countries do it, but they're not democracies. And I think it has angered the American people. And I think that is the source of a lot of President Trump's strength. I hope that President Biden will engage and that he and President Trump will have a hearty debate about the economy, about inflation, about what to do about the border, about what to do about crime, about what to do about our schools, about cancel culture, about all the issues, about international relations, about the war in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, and trying to stop China from taking over the Indo-Pacific. That's what I hope happens. But we'll just have to see. But it's here. This is February for all practical purposes, and the election's in November. So it's going to rev up pretty quickly.
Senator Kennedy, we appreciate your time.